Hello, and welcome to this new special episode of Ember. My name is James Darian, and today I will be interviewing Nevernown, fellow locals creator, and we're going to have a conversation about patents, markets, and a whole bunch of different things. So, why don't you introduce yourself?
Right, so I'm Nevernown. I'm part of the. Well, I manage the technotive locals. I'm my main business is inside of financial security. So I secure a financial company. I do this with together with my manager. Yeah, what else? What's interesting? What's good to know? Over on Technotive, I talk about technology, about stupid programming languages, and about theology, because I'm a pretty fundamentalist Christian if you get down to it. It leaks out everywhere, it's just not the main thing that I talk about. I love security, I love talking about what ifs, and right now we're going to talk about, patents and open source, I believe, which is something I have been, well, on and off involved in on several levels. Yeah.
Well, all right. So one of the things that brought us together was that we were very curious of the idea of how open source source systems, open source methodologies could be applied to patent laws as a way to kind of open up the market, foster more competition, and not necessarily step on the toes of creators, still be able to provide them some sort of incentives to develop new technologies while also being anti-monopolistic in practice and form.
Yeah, so like the thing that like really triggered me to think about this, it's the one that came up most was the diabetes thing, right? So the medical thing, and then the sub is diabetes, because my current roommate and best friend is a diabetic, and basically a few months ago he came home with a story like, yeah, they changed brands, and now I have to readjust to the new injection because it's slightly different but not different enough, licensing stuff, blah blah blah. It's a little dangerous for him even when they change brands, and so I was like, yeah, that is a problem, and how does this work? And then you run into the whole money making thing of the medical field, and you're like, yeah, seems a little weird. So yeah, maybe we can come to some better ideas on how to manage that.
Yeah, here in the U.S. we have a similar issue with insulin, where the company that the largest provider of it basically has a monopoly on it, and even there was a time when not too long ago when Trump had signed an executive order that capped the price on insulin, and then after that executive order was undone, the price went from being maybe double digits back up to triple digits for some people, just out of control. Due to the sheer, it's not an unknown quantity, insulin. People need it or they will die. That's kind of the matter of fact about it. So a lot of these companies feel like they can charge whatever they want for it, and since they're able to maintain their patent, they're able to extend their patents. No one else is ever really able to compete with it or provide an alternative for it, just because of how stringent it is. I saw that as being okay. That's not good. They have a complete monopoly. It's a government enforced monopoly, and even if like we want to make sure that these types of technologies still get developed, but how many times over have they made back their R&D on this project due to not even having to compete with anyone and people having to pay all this money? I mean, the leading cause, one of the leading causes of financial ruin, of bankruptcy in the U.S. is the inability to pay medical bills. And pharmaceuticals play a huge role in that. So that was also what got me very interested in this, hearing stories about this type of abuse, as well as I recently. I am also a gamer. I think most people my generation are. We like playing games, and I saw a story about the company WB, Warner Brothers. They make, I believe they make Batman games. They make Lord of the Rings games and many more. And they recently applied for and received a patent for a system that they did in their their current Lord of the Rings series, Shadow of War, Shadow of Mordor. I don't remember the accurate name. I think the most recent one is subtitled Shadow of War. I think, and they have this pretty. I would consider it a simple mechanic, but also a very depth-filled mechanic, where if the player character is killed by an opponent, by an enemy computer in the story, then the story will recognize that, and that enemy character will be made more powerful, and they may get battle scars from your fight with them, but they'll also be promoted to be like a general or something. So it's kind of like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. So it's kind of one of those, like, when you think about it, it's almost like a why has nobody done this before type of idea. But WB went and they patented that idea. So now, basically, and the patent is so broad, the language of it basically says that no other company can make a game wherein an enemy defeating the player can be recognized in the story, essentially, or it can't be recognized in the mechanics of the game. It's like, wow, that's pretty crazy, that they're getting almost like what feels like a whole genre of a style of mechanics that they're able to just abuse, that they're able to just monopolize instantly like that. And it's also ironic because the rest of their game is almost completely the same as the game series Assassin's Creed. It has the same combat mechanics as Assassin's Creed mostly. It has the same like climbing mechanics. You dive off of buildings into like hay piles or whatever. I think that's in there. Though it might not be hay in the Mordor game, but it's a game that kind of like iterated on all these mechanics from another game, and then to me it's chose bad faith to be iterating on another series' mechanics, and then to make the mechanics that they create completely monopolistic. Like there's almost an unspoken rule in the gaming industry that you don't want to patent all of these mechanics you develop, because that prevents other people from being able to iterate on it and develop further. It'd be like, what if Mario patented jumping in video games?
This is horrible. I was just, when you were saying this, like last time I didn't even think of this, but I've been watching a Let's Play of Metroid. Super Metroid.
Oh,
and so you
I
have
love that game.
Yeah, so it's like now a whole genre, right? The Metroidvania genre.
Metroidvania, yep.
And I've been playing Hollow Knight, and it does the same core concept. Is you go places, and then you find a new gun, or a new type of jump, or a new type of X or Y, and all of a sudden you can go back to earlier areas and reach new places in that area. And
yep.
like if Metroid or Castlevania or I don't know, Zelda decided to patent that, there's like that's the death of a whole genre in retrospect.
Yeah, it really is. Like, imagine if Zelda had patented dungeons, we would never have a Tomb Raider.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
No.
Or any kind of puzzles could be patented. I mean, it's kind of crazy when you think of it. Like, what if Pac-Man had patented mazes in games? Pac-Man, he goes through the little mazes.
Oh yeah, maze games.
Yeah. Like, would like, how broad would that patent apply? If Pac-Man got a patent on mazes, would it just be over the top, where you have to eat the little things going around, or would it be broad enough to where you might want to make like maybe you have this big open game and you're going into this like it has like a hedge maze that you want to walk through. Well, that might be against the patent now. So you can't even have that hedge maze because Pac-Man has a patent on mazes. Like it's that broad. The way that this, at least from my understanding, what I read from it, it seems to be that broad that like, oh, they can't even do something where a character getting defeated, where a character defeating the main character, your character, getting recognized in any sort of fashion is now that's off the books for anyone.
Yeah, probably there's like some jurisprudence, like there should be a judge, and he goes like, well, you can't this, you can't this, and then there will be like a precedent. But like until the court case is had, there won't be a precedent. So if one of the two parties, if the party holding the patent is like, yeah, well, we've got screw you money, then like that. The precedent that the judge says like, hey, well, you can patent with this patent, it can mean A, it can mean B, but it really means B because A is dumb.
Yeah.
But you first need to get there, and that costs a lot of money. And like most innovation in games happens in indie studios. They don't have money; they have mortgages on their houses, which they use to finance their games. And
exactly.
Like that.
If they're lucky, they'll have a production company to like help support them, give them a little bit of extra funding and whatnot. But like all that money goes straight into their games and it comes right back out. Unless they manage to pull off something of the scale of like Minecraft, where it just blows up in popularity, or maybe not necessarily Minecraft, but like Among Us or Fall Guys, one of those games that like suddenly everyone is playing it for even just 10 minutes. Like one of those games that just blows up, which is incredibly rare. But most people can't compete with the even paying for a couple days of those legal fees. And if there's a suit, it could go on for months, years, and all this while you cannot release that game. You can't even continue development on it. And if you've already released it, they can make a cease and desist where you can't keep selling it. And they could even put a freeze on possibly your assets or your revenues from it.
Oh yeah, that touches really close on the YouTube thing as well. But yeah, I digress.
Yes. Well, YouTube's a very interesting situation because it's not. I wouldn't say YouTube itself is necessarily abusing a ton of patents, but they definitely do a lot of anti-competitive behavior, which I would know. I've been reading about anti-competitive behavior for the past like 3 days straight for my job, and one of the key tenets of anti-competitive behavior is price manipulation. And if you look at YouTube, YouTube is funded by Google. They operate continuously in the red, and they're a market leader who continues to, since they don't really charge a price for access to videos at all, unless you do YouTube Red. But what they do is they pay creators more than any competitor can, purely because they can take the loss. They can take the loss They've taken the loss for pretty much since their inception, because Google, especially since Google's taken them over, because Google just funds them the money. Because Google wants them to be the market leader.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting case, because normally the point is to kill your competition that way, but in this case, it's so easy to set up something of a streaming or YouTube or video service. Like Rumble is there. Like all of a sudden, there's all of these things. There's Odyssey, Rumble. There was a third one, and there's like 3 big ones that are not. Yeah, that was one of the first one. Yeah. So that's different.
But the trouble with that is, so it still is an anti-competitive behavior because those other companies are having so much more trouble getting the attention and the growth because they're not even able to pay creators the same amount of money, and creators say, "Well, why am I going to go there? Like, I'm going to take, like, I'm not making revenue if I go there." Like, it might be impossible for me to make revenue, or it might be such a lower amount per view, and they might be getting so many less views simply because there's just not the amount of content there that people don't go there.
Yeah. There are special cases. I follow one. Obviously, people know him. He's pretty well known. He's Life of Boris. He's Russian, and so his in his videos, he's not like a stereotype bad Russian, but like there's some swear words. But then there's also he's got a Kalashnikov, and he's got a knife, whatever you call it, bayonet. You know, for all his Kalashnikov, and so he makes cooking videos, and he just takes the bayonet. He's like, yeah, this is a real knife, and then he starts just cooking this stupid Russian cake.
That's not a knife. This is a knife. Huh?
Yeah. And so he's got a cutting board with special shot glass holders for his vodka, and so YouTube constantly demonetizes him, and he is like, yeah, well, I wasn't getting anything anyways. So he is one of those people that might just move over, be like, whatever, wasn't getting money anyways.
Yeah, and the other thing is, if you're not getting monetized on YouTube, then they're going to, they will also indirectly lower the priority of your content. Well, they may directly do it too, but at the very least, they will indirectly promote other content over yours, because they want to promote the content that is monetized.
Yeah,
which is fair to an extent, but there's no dialogue. But YouTube is like also kind of the only one in the dialogue with creators and the any advertisers. So the advertisers, like, creators can't even talk to them to figure stuff out. So it's kind of it's a very sketchy system, I think.
Yeah,
like it's not only primed for corruption, like it's almost undoubtedly corrupt.
Yeah, well,
just by its nature.
You follow. There's Markiplier. Everybody knows Markiplier. You know, he's the big one after PewDiePie. He's American PewDiePie, basically. That's how people satirize him. And like he's pretty open about stuff. And if like I would put a label on it, it's just like he's got no filter. He just wants the truth out there in a way. And so he's got some videos about, hey, I tried to get this straight with YouTube, but I contacted my contact person at YouTube, and then she couldn't get anything done. So even the people that have a dialogue with someone at YouTube, they're just, blocked one level up.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why, with a lot of the stuff, it's got me thinking, like, okay, well, there needs to be some kind of reapproach, one, I think, to how we view what is a monopoly in regards to digital platforms. What would be considered monopolistic behavior, as well as the inputs for that. So when we had a conversation before where we focused on discussing things like patents, though we can go farther than just that in this. But another reason why I want to bring up both YouTube and Google is because one of the things Google does, I had a professor in my graduate school program who discussed this with me. She used to work at Google, and she asked us, what business is Google in? Everyone would be like, well, they're a search engine, they have YouTube, they own and do all these technological projects. To which my professor would say, no, that is not the business they're in. They already make the money from that. So what business are they working on now? Their business is developing new technologies that they can patent to block out any potential competition for their technologies that they use. So they developed their Google search engine, so now they develop other search engine technologies in order to get a patent on them so that other search engines cannot use those technologies. And they do the same with electric cars, batteries, whatever. They prioritize whatever makes them the most money, but they'll get 10, 20, 30 other patents in order to prevent competition from being able to come in and take on those challenges, take on something competitive. anything that they can develop that can be close to competitive with what they do, they essentially monopolize. And then they're not necessarily creating anything with it, but they're getting the patent. So even in the best case scenario, since they have the patent, best case scenario, they're licensing it out to other people. So they're still like, even their biggest competition would just be more money for them.
Yeah. Here's a little sneak peek. I said I was in security. My graduation was actually in symmetric ciphers. I made a symmetric mobile cipher for the Zoof suite, which you spell XOOFFF. It's by Johan Dahmen, who also worked on AES, the Advanced Encryption Standard. And what I did was I optimized the cipher for a specific range of mobile phones. My competition there was only one, which was Google's Adiantum, which is just something that they know worked, and they implemented it with specific parameters, and they called it good. They're like, all right. And it's not necessarily a patent, but they stifle any innovation there because they're like, yeah, well, we've got something. And we own 80% of the phone market. Good luck. So the only way that Zoof would be competitive is because it's a suite. It provides more than just the one cipher. And so if you have a fast one thing, you have a fast suite of things. That's the only pro it has.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I worked on that, and then I compared it to Google and was like, yeah, we're not going to beat it.
Yeah, it's rough because all these systems are developed in a way where you can't add more competition to them. Look at operating systems for computers and programs. Like, operating systems, by their nature, are monopolies. Like, once you're on an operating system, you can only use the technology that works on that operating system. So like, if you have a PC or a Mac, then you have to get the PC version of this software or the Mac version of this software. So it's a little difficult with operating systems because once you start looking at all of these technologies, well, you're putting more work on the developers to be able to make their things work on each of these different platforms. So there are questions on if it's even possible to make some of these things more competitive. Would it be possible to make another operating system like that can compete with Windows and that can compete with Windows, Mac, iOS, Android? Like, is that possible? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, a big company like Huawei could, and I say that because Huawei's basically just developed their own version of Android because of laws in the US not allowing Huawei to use Android anymore, essentially, due to restrictions on Google. But which that's a whole nother rabbit hole we can go down. But I almost support that just because it's forcing more variety, more competition, more development platforms. But then at the same time, it's like, well, that's also somewhat of a burden on the people who make the software for these platforms.
Yeah, well, what you need actually. I guess the most famous example is the very first is AMD. AMD got started because a really big contractor, namely the US military, got scared. If I recall the story correctly, it went like this. Somebody should look this up, but I believe it went like this. The US military was like, alright, we get computing chips, we get them from Intel. Intel is basically the one company that can make these types of chips. That's a monopoly. But we are the US military. We don't want to be able to be manipulated by somebody holding our computing power hostage. So they took two teams of scientists and started AMD. the first team was supposed to reverse engineer the Intel processors of that time and draw up schemes like this is what it does, and they would draw up the schemes in a high level language, so it would describe what it was doing but not how it was doing it. So they sidestepped the actual patent and all the other licenses that were on the chip because they didn't describe how the chip did anything. They just semantically described this is the behavior it has. And then the second side of this bunch of scientists were given those blueprints, and they were like, yeah, start a company building things that do this. And that's how AMD was born. And then they had two. And so they sidestepped the whole licensing issue by, well, basically saying, okay, we break it down and we build something else. Now, if we reflect back to the insulin thing, it's chemistry, right? So you might find yourself making the same thing because insulin is insulin. It doesn't work if it doesn't have the more or less the right shape and the right well, it needs
attributes.
Yeah.
Like,
I think there's some variation in there. Not sure.
But by and large, it's basically one thing.
Yeah. So, like, would you be able to get away with having a team of scientists just describe what insulin is supposed to do, and then another team of scientists synthesize something that does that thing? Would you get away with that story in court? That's the big question. Because then you can just say, like, hey, man, I know you have a patent, but what we made is not related to your patent. It just does the same thing.
I think it would depend on what how it actually functions in the end. Because I know one of the things that AMD did was that they developed their 64-bit systems, whereas Intel had based it on 32-bit. So I think that was one of the ways that AMD got around it. They're just like, oh no, we're do our systems based on our architectures based on a higher bit rate or something. I just don't know how those bits work yet. I should know that, but I don't for some reason. But yeah, so I think you need to make some sort of substantial differentiator in the process, and if that becomes increasingly difficult when you get to more specific things that are like insulin, which insulin is literally just it's like a chemical receptor. Like it is, this thing is insulin. Your body produces it, and this company has a patent on producing it externally. I mean, maybe you could make a different way to produce it, but because the end result is the same, I don't know if that would count. I don't know if that would violate the patent or not. And so this is something that I should actually look into. But there is a question of does the process necessarily matter as much as the end product? If I and what's a good way to put this? If I, let's say, make this box. We're not gonna have the logo there. Make this box of tissues, and I make the cardboard by layering the pieces of paper or whatever in this way, and this other person layers them the opposite way. Oh, whatever. Whether or not it's the same, but the end result is basically the same. Would that matter? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think there's also I was thinking this just before we started. We were talking about those things, but it's almost like there's no one size fits all here. Because if you're talking about processor architecture, it's either it is the same or it's not. But the semantics are going to be the same. And nowadays, just because you've got the standard instruction sets, so a processor should be able to add things up. You cannot patent that because that would lock everybody out of making a processor whatsoever. Now, there's specific technologies like the hyperthreading that can be patented because you do not need hyperthreading to make a functioning processor. So in that sense, with a processor, the end result of the process is a little less important because, you know, it's always going to add up, it's always going to subtract, it's always going to multiply.
Yeah.
But with insulin, like you said, yeah, it's basically a chemical, it's the same thing. So then, should the process matter? Should people stop producing insulin in their bodies because the end result is patented now? Like, am I violating the law within my own body? If I somehow like extract insulin from my own body, am I violating something? I don't like. Shouldn't that like just go to an honest court of law, and that court of law would be like, yeah, well, listen, we are making this for like thousands of years now. Why did you patent this? Bodies are supposed to do this, and you just found a way to do it.
Right, right. Yeah, because bodies naturally produce insulin. So, like, okay, you found a way to artificially do something that is innate in people. It's innate in organisms. So, can they patent the creation of that thing? It's a question. Then we have... Oh, I was just thinking something that would build on that, and it just completely left my mind. Where was I?
We were thinking about patents, about processors versus insulin.
Yeah, it was something with processors, I think, but whatever. I think we've kind of established what we mean by this. So now let's talk about, I guess, sort of why we bring up the idea of open source in regards to this. So the reason I started thinking of open source is because I've seen with technologies, one of the things that people do is that a lot of people will go online and they will publish their work publicly so that anyone can further develop, further integrate or iterate on these technologies or with these technologies. And they can have all types of different licensing designs for it. There might be a fee, there might be no fee, it might be completely open. There might just be some kind of agreement to, like, if you make a product with this, if you don't make a product with it, it's free, but if you do, you might have to pay some royalties, stuff like that. And I was thinking, wouldn't it be a wonderful innovation on our patent system to integrate something like that into it so that we wouldn't have these forced monopolies, so that we wouldn't have this situation where someone develops something and at least at the time of their development, the general consensus is, oh, this is an innovative and very unique idea. Other people haven't thought of this. Other people haven't created this, and it's something that, like, it's so exclusive that they could make this. That we're just going to let them keep that exclusivity. But then later on down the line, you realize, oh wait, there's so many different ways to do this. But now they're the only people who are allowed to produce this. Because of the patent, because they're able to get extensions and all this other stuff. So that was kind of my thought process. I know this isn't. I know that this isn't the most well developed idea on my end, but this is kind of just me going through a thought process, kind of like a thinking experiment.
Yeah, so what I did is, like I said, I looked up a little, like brushed up on my license knowledge, and so there's like, well, I did find out again about the WTF license, which is just, it's a license that says, I am here for the purpose of saying there's no license, do whatever the fuck you want. So that's one kind of license, but like there's about three, well there's more, there's the Apache license and the MIT license, but most software licenses that you see go by are the GPL and the BSD license, and then you have the Creative Commons licenses for more artistic endeavors. They are very different, and so I found one instance where Linus Torvalds summarized them, and he's like, yeah, well, listen, GPL makes sure that I also get something back, and BSD just means like, hey, you can take this. Once you take it and change it, it's no longer mine.
Right.
So that's a big difference.
So do you see a way that these could be integrated into a type of patent law?
So that's what I've really been thinking about, because most of the licenses that I know of are software licenses, and most things in the non-digital world are usually agreements between parties, and that adds another layer of weirdness, because with patents, there's not really an agreement, is there?
I would say there is, because patents are basically agreement, or they're kind of like a contract with a government, that the government will protect your rights to whatever this technology is that you've developed, or whatever this creative idea is that you've developed, so that you can market it without fear of other people basically coming in, stealing what you developed, and making money on it at your expense.
Yeah, so I guess from the best perspective, what you would want is the GPL v2 specifically is what Linus talked about, and so his point was, if someone then takes my idea and improves on it, they are forced to share the improvement back. So that's that's the first thing that you would want. What makes so that takes care of an important thing, which is make it interesting for the party being forced to license in a certain way. So if you're being forced to license open source-ish, you want the giving back. So I think the first thing, like if you think insulin, so somebody has a 10% efficiency, so that's not really good, a 70% efficiency production, and someone takes that production and optimizes it and gets an 85% production rate from beginning matter until insulin. So you retain 85% of what you put in there, and the rest is waste. And so that's a 15% percent point increase, and how you did that, you should share back to the original company.
Oh, okay. So basically, part of that licensing would be that any developments you create, you return the knowledge of them.
Yes. And so I then hop to Creative Commons, which has a attribute that I really like back when I still did music, which was share alike. Like, okay, fine, you can take my stuff. However, you are supposed to share it under exactly the license that I shared it under. Now that's a double-edged sword in this case, right? Because you can say like, okay, I don't want to share alike. I actually don't mind if the company downstream from me is more restrictive, as long as I force them to share everything back with me. They don't have to tell the whole world how they did the 15% increase. I don't care. I care that I know about the 15% increase. So,
okay.
But the share alike would be more beneficial for like the collective,
broader society.
Yeah.
So, do you think it would be beneficial for patent laws to maybe follow more of that share alike type of strategy?
I think if it's a patent and you like want to force an open market, I think you're forced to do this by design, because you kind of are trying to make things less restrictive. So there's going to be at least a minimum share alike, just by the sheer fact that everybody who wants a patent, like, hey, I improved this, can I have a patent? Oh, well, you're at least forced to share it back to the original inventor. And if you're
making it public knowledge.
Yeah, because of the patent, it's inherently a kind of share alike.
Okay.
Yeah, unless of course we're going like this down this rabbit hole, we're going to think of more clauses you can have. Then maybe share alike would be maybe not. Like some people would like, okay, we want production sub-licensing, like ARM does. ARM thinks of clever processors and then they license out their designs. So like, yeah, you can make a processor with this, just give us some of the money.
Oh, or kind of like how, or they might do something like I think what KFC does is, or Coca-Cola does is they don't actually patent their secret recipes for their products because they don't want anyone to be able to. They don't want people in their home to know what the recipes are. So because if they patent it, yeah, they'll have the exclusive rights to it, but at the same time, everyone will know what it is and they don't want people to know it. Like, if you want to keep something secret, you don't tell the government.
Yeah, well, that's a very good one. Though the government has been good at keeping some secrets, really selectively.
Very selectively, and usually only their own.
Yeah, that's a whole different rabbit trail. No, but yeah, that's basically where you kind of are, but I do think that there keeps being an element of specificness. So I talked about this with my manager because we were talking about software and about simpleness. And if things are simple, it is usually easy to find a thing that perfectly fits it. So for example, you've got SQLite. It's not really open source, but there's some. It's open source in the sense that the code is open. However, not everybody is allowed to join into developing it. So they are very selective about that part.
Interesting.
And that's a one size, right? So it's not really a normal thing. For example, the Linux kernel is a sprawling project. I don't think even Linus knows everyone who is putting things in there. Because a few months back you had that thing where researchers on purpose infected it with dumb bugs just to see if they would get caught, and they didn't, which kind of gives you an idea of how sprawling and big that project is. So in that sense, like licenses and patents as well, and that's, I guess, one of the problems with patents is they are broad, they're in legalese, so as to not leave any loopholes, and by that design they basically strangle markets. So one of the things you might want to do is make it a per case basis. Just abolish patents as a broad thing and just be like, yeah, we have an office with government workers and you can get a contract with them, but it's going to be specific for this situation, and we're going to have someone with a heart for what's good to look at it and be like, well, this is insulin. Bodies make this. People are going to depend on this. You can license this like this and this and this, and this is the final terms. Either that, or you don't license it, you have to keep it secret until somebody else figures it out. And then it becomes one of those, what do you call it? Who snaps first? Right? Who's the first? Like, there's 3 companies making insulin. They keep the recipe secret like Coca-Cola does. And then one of them is like, I'm gonna make this official, and the other ones can just basically go die in a fire.
Right, so it's a race to whether or not you want to patent it.
Yeah.
In that case, so you can either just not share it and not patent it, but then anyone else who develops it is able to go on and create it and maybe patent it themselves. But if you patent it, not only do you have to make it public, but you are able to license it, so you can still get a type of return on development.
Yeah.
Even if the competition ends up wiping you out in terms of like actual production of it.
Yeah, now I'm thinking maybe it would also fix a little bit of what Google's doing. Because in order for the Google machine to work, they need to license or patent, in the old system, patent the whole lot of things.
Right.
And if you have an individual contract for every one of them, and you're going to make it specific to the situation, really, the government workers are going to have to really understand what kind of thing is this, what can't you do with it. And that slows the process down, which sounds bad, except it stops giants like Google, but it doesn't stop brilliant startups with 1 or 2 patents.
Right, so basically the bigger the machine gets, the slower it will go.
Yeah.
Whereas currently the way the system is set up, it's almost like the bigger you get, the faster you go. Oh.
Yes, sorry. It's getting dark here. The Netherlands is going
to needs to turn on
sleep.
the light. But that it is interesting because, like, I mean, even look at if you look at things like mergers and acquisitions, then you can see like a company like Microsoft just bought Bethesda Game Studios, and again another gaming reference. But like so Microsoft just went on a buying spree. They bought up all these game studios, and the price they paid for Bethesda and all of Bethesda subsidiaries and all of their studios was like, I think it was like a month of their revenue. But like, but like, how long would it take any other company to make that kind of money?
I don't know. It's these are imaginary. Like I said, like I think before we recorded that, you know, I work in a company that makes a good deal of revenue, and they do actually acquisition and merger facilitation, and you know the money I see there is like, wow, I'm never gonna have that in my life, and
yeah.
So the kinds of money you're talking about here, it's like, okay, who can stop Microsoft really? Like by the way, wasn't Bethesda like a part of Steam?
No, they made deals with Steam so that they could yeah, Bethesda got in trouble got like a bad rep for this. They made it so that they could sell the what was it? The mods that people would make.
Oh yeah,
community.
There was that thing, and there
Yeah,
was that backfired.
Oh yeah, that backfired massively. But anyhow, the point is like, once you reach a certain scale, you're basically, even if there's competition, one, you can buy it up. Two, you can patent continuously. Like, you might be able to have 10 teams going developing all these patents that maybe all these other startups are only able to do one, and it might take them way longer. So there may be an amount that it slows down it may slow down innovation, but it may also preserve innovation. Because one of the things these big companies do is they're able to innovate in all these different ways, but then they want those ways that they innovate to be like exclusively owned by them, and they want themselves to be the only ones doing that. And I mean, I think the goal of any company is to have market dominance, and to be able to saturate themselves across the market, super saturate themselves if they can. Like, they want everyone coming to them. That's just the nature of the beast. And I'm not gonna hold that against any company, honestly, but it becomes kind of this weird system where there's innovation for getting that first entrant in and taking over a market, and then it's like they use that one position in order to stifle everything else. And like, if you look at like Google's search engine only shows you a small percentage of all websites on the internet. It shows you like 4% of internet websites in its search results. That means we're missing 96% of the internet.
Oh yeah.
When we use Google, and like, almost everyone relies on Google or some iterative type of search engine. Which, I mean, there are iterative types of search engines, which is good, but they have to find all these techniques that Google hasn't patented yet. But regardless, like that kind of can show you how, like, in a very direct sense, I can show you how your scope is limited by a single monopolistic control. Once that control shows enough people that it gives them a broad enough thing that for their purposes they're able to take over the market, well, then you're losing access to the majority of alternatives out there, of additional potential results or whatever.
Google could be extra insidious though,
yeah,
because you've got Google Scholar, which you use to search for scientific papers, which is in large part things that get patented. And so if Google would be real evil, and they did drop their "Don't be evil" slogan like 10 years ago or something, they could just be like, yeah, well, how about we just tweak Google Scholar so, it always seems as if we already did it, and you don't have to do research anymore. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. They could actually manipulate search results to make it look like, okay, any idea it's either done or it's patented, or they could even just selectively present information so that it looks like all the research and all of the scholarly work only supports this one idea that Google supports.
Yeah, well, we've got the cancel culture and stuff, and we know that they're mucking with YouTube. Well, I follow some very not well known controversial channels, and I noticed that, well, I'm not gonna find that by searching with anything Google. I just go external, search there, and then jump back into YouTube when I find it. So it's like, it's just one little step to go from like everyday manipulation to, okay, well, let's muck with official results, the data in Google datasheets, the things in Google Scholar, and like what you want to bet that the patent office actually uses Google to do some of its research? Yeah. I don't know.
And if you look at I don't want to. I'm not going to say specifically what all of the research that I'm about to mention is, but I think everyone will know what I'm talking about, just because this can be uploaded on YouTube. But YouTube, Facebook, Google, they've all been downplaying anything that was negative about lockdowns, potential negative side effects, consequences, or related like treatments to stuff. Wink, wink. But they all downplay that. So what's to say that Google on their Google Scholar isn't just like saying, okay, we're only going to show off the scholarly articles that support what we're promoting about this.
Yeah, well, there's a very good example. I told you about the Zoof thing. So
yes,
there's several. So what it specifically solves in a domain that I was working on is storage media encryption, disk encryption, SSD, SD cards. Whatever you store your photos on, it's going to use that. It's going to use block encryption with blocks the size of the sectors that you use on the storage medium. So that's pretty straightforward. But the way you do that, you can do that in at least two ways. There's more, but there's two of them that I looked into. And I asked my professor, I'm like, right, so we're doing it this way, with block encryption. Couldn't we just, way easier, way faster, use stream encryption? It's two different things. I won't just get into the details here. And he's like, yes. However, because of certain aspects, we are forced to use block encryption because it is better suited to detect tampering when somebody wants to pirate a movie out of the device. So, while we are pretending to make this disk encryption for the end user, it is actually also used to protect in-memory secrets and other stuff. I forgot this. It's been years now since I looked into since I did the research, but basically the block encryption also allows the companies to keep a stranglehold on some secrets, so that they can keep the DRM stuff out of your hands. And so one way that Google, who's also in the DRM business, might act is like, okay, you're going to look into disk encryptions. We're only going to show you the papers that talk about disk encryption that facilitated by block encryption, which is good for our DRM stuffs. Just like that's not even hard, because people will just assume, as I did before I asked my professor, like, hey, this is just better, right? He's like, no, it's not. It's not really. It's just that we were forced to do it this way.
Okay. So yeah. So there's a lot of. So there's a lot of influence based on industry influence, I suppose I would say.
Yeah. And that's of course one of the big things.
So,
Sorry.
oh, I was just gonna say, I wonder how our ideas for updating patents may or may not affect that.
Let's see. So we had the blocking option. Well, I don't know if they have. I don't know if they have to be honest about their intentions, right?
Right.
And well, one thing that should get solved is it's now illegal to crack open your printer and replace the ink with, cheap ink. And they used to do it by patenting certain numbers and saying those are numbers that protect secrets. Put those numbers inside DRM code that basically did nothing except invalidate the cartridge or the printer if you put in illegal ink. That's it. And so it's basically made illegal by something in there being patented, and you can't break it by law. Now, so the question is then, if the design of such a printer ink block, and the DRM specifically, would you be able to renegotiate that? Because if so, you could drive up the price of printers and down the price of ink. So I have point in case, I have a printer over there. It cost me €20.
Yeah,
So that's like $25. So it ran out of ink because of a mishap. It broke. Its paper got stuck. It printed 20 pages blank. Ink ran out. I went downstairs because I live in an apartment right above the office supply store. I'm like, I need some ink for this printer. They're like, we got you. That'll be €70. I'm like, 7? No, 70. Okay. Actually, they didn't tell me. I just had to rub my eyes while I looked at the price tag. I was like, no. So it is like 3 times as expensive as the printer itself because of one little bit of software that's patented in there, which is DRM software. You can't touch it legally. If you could solve that, that would be great. I don't know if that's really patent stuff.
I wonder if... Yeah, because the question would be, like, would this patent enable other people to be able to make ink that could be used in those printers? And would they necessarily need to follow the same type of restrictions? Because, of course, like, I have an HP printer, I have to buy HP ink. But I think this is actually a good example that people can relate to. Like, because printer ink is so freaking expensive. Even in the US, it's really expensive. Imagine if, instead of only being able to buy HP ink, that there were generic brands that would work in your printer. Well, suddenly, the price of ink could go way down. Instead of paying $80 for this, like, little thing of ink, you might be paying $10. Which is why I think people also worry about this type of patent stuff. It's just like, oh my god, these companies don't want it because they would lose their monopolies. They would lose their ability to charge basically whatever they want, and other people would be like, well, I have to pay it because I need to be able to print stuff. I mean, printing may not be as relevant these days, but still, like, there are things that need to be printed. It's like, okay, well, geez, I maybe need to print one thing a month. The ink goes bad every couple of months. I'm gonna need to buy new ink, just because, like, maybe I need to print something out for my taxes or something. But I only need to print for my taxes. So you get the printer that prints with the cheapest ink. Well, you're still having to pay for that new ink every year. So the price was lower, then HP's not making as much money, and yada yada yada. It's just something to consider. Yeah.
Yeah, you could look into toner, because my manager actually was like, he was like, I'm done with this. And he bought there's some sites in the Netherlands in Dutch where you can basically say like, hey, is there any offices that are remodeling and need to get rid of their chairs or their printers, because we'll buy them at like half price. And so he bought a half price industrial printer with toner in there, and apparently toner is priced differently. It's not in the DRM lock-in system. So I don't know this from top of my mind, so but if that would be, it could be a good way to look into that. Like, how does toner and industrial printing relate to, or I mean industrial, I mean just office printing and like the normal inkjet printing, because the ink is expensive, but toner, apparently they price that differently. I thought it turned everything off, but no, alarms do not.
Well, that's fine. But yeah, I mean, and that I really like bringing this up in ways that we can kind of discuss things that regular people have to deal with pretty regularly. Like, I think it's important to discuss these topics and put them in a way that people can understand how it will relate to them. So basically, the idea would be, if you're insulin, well, you'll have more generic brands that you can get. But it would be like through a licensing agreement. If you patent something, it would, with our open source patenting idea, it would be, the patents would be available for, essentially for license. And now how those licenses would work, how it would be priced, I think there's definitely a discussion that can be had on how that would work. Because again, you don't want companies coming in and then producing a bare minimum version of something at such a low level of revenue that it's going to completely, like, okay, they're basically doing an anti-competitive behavior in response to something that you created, and then you're going to go out of business because you haven't made back your money in, like, and you're not going to be able to make back your money in a few years because this other company just undercutting you so much. Like, you don't want that to be able to happen. So maybe there's some kind of ratio of costs that could be integrated into the way that it works. Maybe maybe you could say, like, take the production costs and delivery to market costs, and then add a 5% essentially tax on that to the company that initially developed it, and that is your so that way their costs will always be at least, say, like 5% more. If you're both able to get minimum costs in production, their costs will always be at least 5% more than yours. So it guarantees an amount that, okay, one, technically you could undercut them. You might not want to, though. You probably wouldn't want to. But you can guarantee yourself that there will be a window to make your revenue back.
Yeah, so basically what you actually want to do is you want to... So let's take the extreme case, right? So we together, we're both computer guys, we develop a new compression algorithm. And Google just wants to get in on it, so they copy it, they improve slightly on it, they get it licensed, they have to pay us the 5%. They're way bigger than us, so they can really produce. They ship it with everything and stuff, and they basically lock us out of the market, even though we're getting the 5%, and it's being funded by other projects that do generate revenue, so they can undercut us. So would you really would you do it on profit? Or would you say no? This needs to be on
cost.
Is revenue the thing that that you have before
revenue,
or after?
Revenue is
costs
the
get deducted?
Total sale price, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah, so you would just take a cut of revenue.
Cut of revenue, not cut.
I think that's the most fair thing.
Not cut of profit or cut. Yeah, because if it's cut of profit, it's going to be a lower amount. So, and if you make it cut of cost, there is a potential that they could sell it. That they could try to run you out of the market and then sell it at, like, or maybe they'll enter a market that's where like that you just can't be able to get into, and then they could sell it at like a premium, and then you're kind of like missing out in a
Yeah.
way. So yeah, maybe it would make sense to make it like a rate based on revenues, and maybe you could set they could set it up so the patent rate like maybe minimum is 0, but there probably would need to be like a cap on it. Like you don't want to be like 100%. That'd be like okay.
Yeah. You can maybe make that industry specific. You can maybe go industry specific with that, because there's a real weird, like for example with software, it's like in essence, once you have the code and it works, you can compile that and sell it to people, whatever you want. You there's only startup costs. At some point,
maybe it
there's
should be patent share.
just
Maybe
the
it actually
download
should be profit
space,
share.
very roughly speaking.
Because then you could do a higher percentage, and you could though I feel like that could get dirty. But like you could if you did profit sharing, you could guarantee
Yeah.
that the company that creates it could get a majority profit. Potentially, though I'm not sure if you would want to do that. I'm
Yeah,
thinking
well,
no.
I'm thinking. Yeah, the scary thing to me is like if it's profit, but you're undercutting and you're doing the Google thing where you basically
Yeah,
the YouTube thing where
yeah,
you're
that's
basically
true.
running
There
at a
wouldn't be any
loss.
profit.
There's no profit there.
And even with revenue, if you're operating at a loss, like the revenue actually is going to be below the cost. So maybe it would be cost or revenue, whichever is higher.
Could be, or maybe you would offer like a range of maybe you could have the company decide what they want. Like maybe you want a flat price. It's like, all right, we know this thing takes us €5 per I don't know, insulin syringe to produce. We would another company to pay us $2.50. No matter how they twist or turn their process, they optimize it, whatever. They can do the sharing back thing with the optimization even.
So
But
maybe
there's
it would
$2.50
be,
flat price per unit.
if you want to do a flat price, you would probably need some kind of restrictions on it, because you can't say, okay, I developed this insulin, it cost me $5. Okay, any company that wants to produce insulin needs to pay us $100 per thing. Like, so in order to avoid a situation like that, I
Yeah.
think maybe it would, one of the best ways to do it would be, you could create a flat licensing price per product produced, that you pay back at, like, maybe not at the end of the year, but the end of a quarter or something, or month, whatever kind of system works out for that. But maybe even pays out in real time, whatever. I mean, we have the technology for that these days, but if we wanted to be a maximum competitiveness idea, I think there would be an idea of limiting it based on cost of production for the initial development team. So, like, well, it wouldn't be good with something like software.
Let's say I spent
though,
3 years.
where, like, okay, once you R&D it, you can just copy and paste. There's really no extra cost really associated.
No, but that's why you would want branch-specific patents. I think that's one of the problems
Yeah.
we have right now. Patent is a patent, right? As far as I can see. But maybe you could go branch-specific. It's like, oh, what do you license this under? Oh, this is a legal thing. Well, I don't know what you would want to license in legal. Well, let's pick another thing. So in software, you wouldn't do the production thing, I guess. In software, you would just, I guess, do
Maybe.
an intellectual properties licensing thing. You would just negotiate it, and then in let's see, in medicine, there's always production costs. You need to build the factory, you need to make it run, and what I know from actually from my security classes is that those guys do not update their factories, because it takes months to shut it down safely, update everything, make sure it works, and then put it up in production again. So for medicinal things and for chemistry things, it's usually like, well, they're all in on this, so you can negotiate a very not very big margin. Not small, but per se, but like it doesn't need to be sizable. But with software, like you said, it's just copy paste eventually. It's gonna be very easy at some point. So you would need to get your you would actually need to get a higher cut there.
Yeah.
To give back to the original producers.
It's a very like in-depth conversation, and there's so many different aspects to it. But I think it's definitely like, if you have a product, maybe I think it should be based off of the production costs of the development team. Like, if we made a hardware thing, well, we would want to be able to make sure that we recoup some amount of our costs in our production from other companies who do it. And the entire idea is to get back, is to make a profit off of R&D costs. Like, that's kind of the goal of anything you make, is that you make more money than it costs you to make it.
Yeah, so we get an accountant to move in here. We make a hardware thing, then our first step is we get a trustworthy accountant. We are like, these were our incomes, these were our R&D costs, this much money went there, this much money went there, here's the receipts. Right? So say we spent 100,000, so we go to the
patenting office.
Yes, so we're like, alright, we spent 100,000 making this thing, this hardware thing. And then they can say like, actually, what you could do is just cap it. Don't think about monthly things and about how much revenue. They can just say like, okay, you can negotiate a contract that in some way over time from every company that licenses this gets you 110% of the initial R&D costs. Or 90%, I don't know what's a good number, but so you could, for example, with a small company, you could negotiate like, hey, you want to also do this, but you're not going to be up to speed at once, so over 5 years, you're going to pay us the 110,000 that this is worth. Or we spent 100,000 and they'll pay us 110 over 5 years. But then Google comes in and they're like, yeah, we want that, and we're like, all right, well, it's 110,000 up front.
I think the option for spacing out payments is also a very is also something that would be good, and it may be you could possibly run that based off of the scale of the company wanting to license it. There's a lot of aspects to this, and I think it would probably be best to have more accountants working in the patent office than lawyers.
Definitely. Maybe also some people that know the technology.
Like, one of the biggest issues we have in the US is that we have our laws being made by lawyers. Like, it used to not entirely be this way, but over the past, 70 years, we have gone from maybe a 40 to 50% lawyer to politician ratio to well over 90, I think, at this point. And they literally have a vested interest in making these things require lawyers to work.
It's horrible. Warframe, I believe, games again. Warframe is from America, I believe, and so back when it came out, I was working for a retail company. We were selling climbing gear, and my job was to take care of the back-end system, and because of reasons, mainly the code being crappy, I kept customer names and orders on my laptop. And then I read the end user agreement of Warframe, and I was like, I can't legally install this shit while I've got customer data on my disk. Because the thing is going to scan everything. So the end-user agreement was like, we're going to scan everything to make sure you're not using cheat engines or stealing our code. And I was like, hey, listen, man, this is...
Yeah.
What are you, a virus?
Yeah,
this is my computer.
That's really excessive.
Hands off. But yeah. Yeah, but it's in there, and that's one of, like, it's obviously, that's a lawyer thing to do. Like, to cover all bases, we're just going to make sure this is legally it's illegally binding. You can't. We can scan you and you can't do anything. And then a few years later, or a few years earlier, maybe around that time, I got into Minecraft, and the original license for Minecraft was like, "Hey, welcome. We're all friendly here. This is an agreement between people, and you can use the source code. You can mod it. We don't really care. Just don't sell Minecraft Plus. Just don't steal the source code and sell it as your own." And I was like, well, I can understand that. It was like this much text. I was like, yeah, I want that. I don't want legalese in my face. I want to play a game. I want to have fun.
Terms and conditions in games these days are ridiculous, and we could get into the whole aspect of technology companies being able to unilaterally update their terms and conditions at any time. We could get into that at some point. Not sure if we want to do that today, but yeah, that's
no.
It's kind of ridiculous what some companies can do.
Yeah, it illustrates though. Like, I think one of the things that if you are going to go open source route and if you're going to do the licensing different than it is done now, then one of the biggest impacts you're going to want to make is make it less legalese. Like you said, less lawyers, but maybe also just like in a way it's part of law. And so let's say there's someone with an IQ of 80 and diabetes.
Needs to be able to understand.
That person maybe not. He needs to understand. Maybe he doesn't need to read the original text, but like he gets his mom or his best friend, they read it together. They should be able to understand what's going on because he's going to put that stuff inside his body.
Exactly.
He needs to understand.
There's an amount of just common language and common understanding that really should be applied for the average citizen and even the below average citizen. Not to, I mean, let's be real. Like, if you're only making things for the average, then the people who are below average in any aspects are gonna still have trouble with things. But if you also make things only for the advanced people, well then, it's just more and more exclusive, basically. And that's kind of an issue. You want it to be available for everyone, as much as you possibly can, and you want people to be able to understand as much as they possibly can. So, I think that's very important. I think it's important that we're able to, that in developing this type of conversation and language, that it's able to be understood by everyone.
Yeah, I think we are touching on something deeper now because my brain is now going like, hey, actually, this touches on, like I said, I follow some fundamental Christians on YouTube and stuff, and there's one guy who was like, well, he used to be a businessman, and those businessmen that he operated with, they operated by this thing. My word is my law. If they said something, they would do it. And so they could have real simple agreements over dinner, right? They would over dinner. They were like, well, I'll buy this and this from you for 80 million.
Right.
It was just a word between friends, or not even friends, just between business people. But because they all had the credo, my word is my law. If 2 years later they were reminded, hey, you would do this, and they look at their finances, they were like, oh well, that would cost me right now. That would not be smart. They would still do it. And they had a culture of trust. And what you see with the like Minecraft, the original license for Minecraft was culture of trust. And open source, with all its weird licenses, it's still all fairly open. It's a culture of trust. Like, at least you know what you're getting into. And these end user licenses and these patent battles that you see unfolding, they're a culture of distrust. And so maybe a deeper thing is like, well, somehow part of this should be to encourage a culture of trust without naming everything shut.
If there isn't trust within your society, you don't have a society. Like, I think that's kind of
that's
a way
a fair
to put
way
it.
To put it, yes.
If you don't have faith that you will be able to engage in good context with the people you're engaging with, then that's going to be a problem. That's why the U.S. has so much political issues these days, because there is almost virtually zero trust between conservatives, liberals, or right, left, whatever you want to call it. Like, there's so much distrust going on, and so much just, I guess, disengagement might be the way, or offsetting engagement. So I think it's, well, I'm saying I think too much, but I believe that having a system like this where we can really have an open dialogue, where having a system where it's possible for competitors to come in and out of markets almost at their leisure, or be able to utilize technology, to utilize these other developments of their fellow men, their fellow citizen, in a way that helps the society overall. I think there's a lot of benefit to that. And I think I do believe it would be very healthy for any country to be able to have that kind of a faith in their, I guess, have that kind of faith within just the people they're doing business with.
Yeah. I'm also reminded that this is a whole different angle still. So I hope... Well, this is getting recorded,
yes.
So we can watch it back and take notes then. That's good. But I'm reminded here in the Netherlands we have a real weird system around drugs. So, notoriously, of course,
yes.
It's legal here to acquire drugs. It's not legal here to have wholesale. So... drugstores so the coffee shops, they call them here, that sell drugs, never buy drugs officially. They just somehow have them. Theoretically, this will be done because it's legal to grow your own weed, for example. Clearly visible in your windowsill, at most 3 per household. And that's where it would come from. Of course, it doesn't come from it comes from the criminal circuit, but the Dutch government has always had a blind eye policy to almost everything. So in the Netherlands, it's really normal for a police agent to catch you on a real offense and say, next time you're gonna pay, and just lets you go again. Because enforcement is not as important as people understanding the idea of the law. And so I was thinking, while we were talking, like, hey, maybe it would be good to put that kind of thought into the patent system as well. And so turn a blind eye to people that do things on a people level. So if producing insulin gets so easy that you can do it in a jar on your windowsill, make it legal for a diabetic to have a jar on the windowsill that makes insulin. Right? Or at least maybe not make it legal, but like turn a blind eye to it. Like, man, he's sick.
Yeah,
just
so
let him make his own stuff. And then maybe it's worse quality.
No, so I was just saying, so
go
like, people can self-produce. Like, if it's possible for people to self-produce, they should be able to self-produce,
Yeah.
regardless of if there's patents for it. Um, this actually reminds me of issues with farming in the U.S. Um, where big farms will get patents on their and this is a big issue with genetically modified crops, GMO. Um, I guess the O isn't crops, but whatever. Genetically modified stuff. So these big companies, they will genetically modify and patent their whatever it is, or their corn or whatever, and then they'll have their they'll put their farms basically upwind from where these other smaller farmers are. So then wind blows, the seeds go into the other farmers' land, and if possible, they love for it to be over state borders so it can become a federal issue. And then all of a sudden, they're like, hey, we suspect this other farm is growing our crops. Well, they can't do anything to stop the wind from blowing the seeds into their lot. Like, it's like they're trying to be organic, but these big farms are growing their crops all the way to the edge. Like, there's all the way up to the border between their lands. Like, they can't do anything about it. They literally cannot do anything. They can't go and find the seeds. They're not going to know that those seeds are producing the other place's crop until it's until it's grown, basically.
Yeah, or maybe you won't even see it on the outside. It's just
it might look
still
exactly
be a little
the same.
bigger
So
or something.
they're not even aware of it. They can't be aware of it. Literally cannot be aware of it. And this has put a lot of farms in the U.S. out of business because they're like, we suspect this. We're going to sue you. There's like, well, I don't know if there's like a certain check or something, but eventually they get the right to look at it, and it's like, oh, here it is. We just need to find one. You're done. Your entire farm is done. We claim it. We're suing you to Kingdom Come. You can't afford anything. Like, you're not gonna be able to afford it. So that's like another part of this whole patent issue is that, like, what about things that are unintentional? What about things that are even impossible to have intention to prevent?
Like Newton and Leibniz with their calculus thing, but then, like, back then it was... Actually, yeah, I think I told this story before when we didn't record. My roommate is in chemistry, and there were two professors who were accidentally each other's research, because they didn't communicate, but their PhDers met at the coffee table, exchanged ideas, and went the same direction. It was a train wreck because one of them, like, they didn't. These guys didn't go by patent, but by publishing. So that thing. So they put it in. One of them put it in a faster journal with a little rough reputation, and the other one in a slower journal with, like, a very good reputation. So the one came out before the other, even though the other one was originally handed in first. And it was a whole legal mess, and I forgot the conclusion now, but it's the same thing. It's very unintentional. Like, well, people talk at the coffee table. What happens?
Like, okay, if there is some crossbreeding, if someone files a patent and gets it and just happens to get it first, maybe someone even submits it first, but the other people are given it first just because it gets processed in a queue first. Because maybe this goes in this person's pile, this goes in this other person's pile. One person goes by faster than the other. Even if you get in the slow person's pile first, well, you're kind of out of luck. And that can happen when companies race to R&D things. Like, should a company that also invested maybe just as much, or maybe possibly more, maybe a bit less, but possibly more, or the same amount into R&D as you, but they're just like a day or two slower. Should they be completely kept out of this industry entirely because of that? I think that's an unfair business practice, or an unfair governmental practice, I should say.
Yeah. So I was thinking, how about let's say it's impossible for 3 companies at the same time to fix something. Let's say that it's just 2. That makes it a little easier. If they can prove that their review periods overlapped, or like they can prove that their development periods overlapped, and they didn't really, it was unintentional, and they both landed at the pile, and within 3 weeks from each other they got approved and rejected respectively. What I could see is use the gun of the government to say, hey, you guys negotiate how you're going to solve this between yourselves. If you can't get to an agreement within X months, like say 6 months, the government takes the patent and you both are screwed. So you better figure this out. So like
if you don't come to an agreement for how you'll either maybe charge each other or not charge each other for your development, allowing each other to use it or not use it, then the government gets ownership, and the government will just say, hey, okay, we get a 5% cut of any time this technology is used.
Something like that. Like the exact penalty, I'm not going to presume to name that, but it seems to me like to give a biblical example, actually, like Solomon, like there's these 2 women, and one of their kids died, and the other one's like, yeah, well, no, your kid died. This one is mine now. This one, the live one, is mine, obviously. And they both say the live one is mine, and Solomon is like, hey, it's real simple. Either you guys get to an agreement about whose kid this is, or I'm gonna cut it in half, and you both get half of the kid. And those women figured it out in seconds. Like, the one who was the mother was like, no, just give it to her. I want the kid to live at least. And the other one was like, hey, cut it. Mine is dead anyways. You know, they didn't say the quiet part out loud, but their behavior showed that, oh well, this is it. And so the idea here would be that giving the government the ultimate decision to put both of the arguing parties at a disadvantage will force them to reveal the next best thing. Like it will force them to negotiate something that's beneficial for both of them.
I think in the case of 2 companies literally developing something at the same time and having the records to prove that they developed it and didn't just like word edit the patent for the other one after that one went through, which hey, I've been to college, I've seen people do it. There are people who just take papers and they'll just like change 10 words and then submit it. Actually, I almost got in trouble for that because someone actually stole one of my papers, and my professor's like, so these are very similar, and I was just like, dude, like I don't know what to tell you. Like, you gave us the same topic, and like I shared a resource with them. I didn't think they would copy and paste the exact same thing as me. And I didn't even copy and paste. I never do that. I always paraphrase stuff. But
yeah, but those research algorithms, because people work around the algorithms all the time.
Yep.
Those comparison algorithms get really twitchy.
Funny. But yeah, there's a lot of this. There's that, and then there's a debate of, well, all right, if we decide to not charge each other, how will we split the revenues from the patent itself? We co-patent it. Let's say that ends up being the result. Co-patent. How do we deal with the license? And at that point, it's just kind of, how do we split the profits? Is it 50-50? Maybe this party is guaranteed this amount, but this party gets a percentage of it. So it's like, And that can all be negotiated out.
Hmm.
I think. I think that can all be negotiated out. You don't want them to do any kind of trust behavior when determining this, but in general, like you don't want them to talk about this and then be like, all right, next time I'm gonna work on developing this, and you're gonna work on developing that. Something like that. You don't necessarily want that to happen, but like at the same time, I think this type of system would go a long way towards at least alleviating a lot of these pressures.
Yeah, I think the negotiations should be a big part, because I do know that in the cipher development, for example, there was a hashing competition. So the security community is death scared of quantum cryptography.
Quantum computing.
I shouldn't say that. There's quantum computing, and there's quantum cryptography. They're two different things. Two completely different things. But the computing thing can break some algorithms. One of them is asymmetric ciphers. Well, you can replace asymmetric ciphers in some ways that they are used with hashes. But hashes can sometimes be broken by simple table lookups, and apparently one of the quantum computing algorithms is very good at fast multi-table lookups. So you need to find a mathematical problem that is quantum hard. And so what happened is there were like 25 entrants in the first round of the NIST competition. Then they got to know each other, and there were some similar ideas, some similar mathematics being done, and so not only got some of the entrants thrown out because their math was sucky, or their implementation was leaky, or something else was dumb. Dan Bernstein had a real bad opinion of some of them. Dan Bernstein has opinions about everything nowadays. He used to fight with the government, now he fights with other people. Actually, the uni I went to, he lives there. Yeah, he actually taught some guest lectures. But so there's all those things. But then some of those teams recognize, like, hey, we're onto the same idea, but we did it slightly differently. And instead of like, of course it's competition, nothing's patented or finalized yet. They were like, you know what, let's work together. So 2 teams of 4 mathematicians became 1 team of 8 mathematicians, and they merged their codes and they implemented both their smart ideas. And that's a good thing in that case. So I guess you want to leave it as free as possible in that sense.
And I think
I guess
just
that's my
by
point.
developing a system wherein patents aren't necessarily exclusive, where they by nature are not exclusive, I think doing that, having them all licensable at certain rates or for certain amounts of money, I personally prefer the rate process for it, because it won't exclude small companies and startups from being able to enter in. Because like, oh, we say this cost us $10 billion to develop. There is a $20 million buy-in. Well, okay. Okay. I mean, hey, maybe a small company wouldn't be able to develop something that costs that much to R&D anyways, but maybe they could. So I like the percentage thing, but what was I about to say? Damn it. What was I saying? I lose track. I let myself get distracted by my tangents too much. But yeah,
it's fine.
So the idea of the open patent system would even if these companies kind of did monopolistic practices in terms of communication and future developments, it wouldn't preclude other companies from being able to benefit from their developments and be able to make their own products off of it, even if they're paying more and more licensing fees because these companies are licensing so much or are patenting so much. Well, it gets to a point where, okay, well, maybe I'm having to charge a little more, maybe my profits aren't quite what they could be, but it's not stopping all these different competitors from getting into the market.
Yeah. So I guess that's what you really need to look out for, because we are in a really weird market. It's what you should also look out for is if those rates get too big, right? Because we were talking about Microsoft buying companies at basically a 1 month revenue price. So you're talking about real extreme cases there, and so you might want to think like, yeah, so wouldn't it be better, for example, for not one small company but 10 small companies to band together in a coalition and get the one patent under a shared name and then produce in their own labs?
Well, that's interesting.
I don't
That
know
would
how
definitely
that would
require
work.
a rework of trust laws. Like, I guess that would just be like mergers, though. Like a bunch of small companies merging together. So,
Kind of. But they might also still do something separately. I mean, actually, the company I work for is not kind of a merger, but it's kind of a collaboration between 3 companies. And the resulting company has a name, but it shares employees with all the other companies. And they might be on payroll with the other company,
that reminds me of
or
the
on
Pokemon
payroll
company.
with the company I
Or
work
another video
at.
game reference. It's like 1/3 owned by Nintendo, or no, not Creature. Oh yeah, the Pokemon company. It's 1/3 owned by Nintendo, 1/3 owned by Creature Inc., 1/3 owned by Game Freak, who developed the Pokemon game. So that's interesting. Yeah, there are interesting types of collaborations that companies can do, different ways to work together to be able to compete and develop. There is definitely a conversation about what these large scale companies can do and how far they can like expand their reach and ownership, because it's like eventually there could easily become a point where all the biggest companies own everything just because they can. There could easily be a point where Amazon could literally buy up every, like, just because they're growing at such a rate. Like, their revenue is basically a percentage. Is basically guaranteed to be a percentage of their scale, essentially. Well, there becomes a point where their scale is so large that if they're getting this percentage revenue based on their scale, that percentage is going to be more than basically everything else combined, even if everything else is growing.
Yeah, well, and you see that they are also geared towards this, right? Because have you seen those videos to just make it a little? I have to go soon, so I'll try to make it a little simpler to illustrate what I mean. Is they are so big that they have robotic magazines, or this hangars, like where they put all the stuff that you buy. So they always have stock, and it's just fully automated with like these weird robot cars. They're like supersized Roombas with grips that go all the way up to the top, and they take the package out, and it's weird. And so you're like, yeah, well, not only are they so big that they're guaranteed a percentage of whatever's going on in the world, basically, also whatever competition is there is never going to be so efficient.
They're already so far ahead, they can continue to become more efficient, and they can also force the other companies to be less efficient because they're able to develop invest in technologies that make them more efficient while essentially pushing for things that would slow down their competition. Like Amazon in the US, they increased, I think it was last summer or the summer before, they increased their company minimum wage to $15 an hour. And then the day they did that, they started pushing for a federal minimum wage of $15 an hour. why would Amazon want a federal minimum wage of $15 an hour? Because all their competition can't afford it. They like they're competing with mom and
Yeah.
pop shops.
It's basically, yeah. It's like at some point size is not quantitative, it's qualitative in change, basically. That's what you're looking at, and that's a horrible thing. And I'm like thinking about it that deeply. I wanted to make it more light, but hey, thinking about it that deeply, can you even catch it in a law? Because you can't. You can always anticipate quantitative changes, but a qualitative change you can never really anticipate in a complex system. It's like in a game, it's real simple, right? At some point, you're going to do enough damage, for example in Dark Souls, very difficult game, but at some point you grow enough that in the starting area you one-hit things. That makes it very easy, because nothing hits you back. And that's basically what Amazon did now. They made a qualitative change, and some things are for them are always home run. And you can't compete with that, because the next company before Amazon is still not 100%ing their home runs in that sense.
And the thing about
that's
Amazon
a qualitative
is like,
change.
Okay, they increased their employee pay to $15 an hour, but then at the same time, they're not hiring as many employees because they're now making robots that cost maybe millions of dollars each to do all these tasks, and over an amount of time, those robots will pay themselves off in relation to like the price of an employee. So it's actually long run cheaper.
Oh yeah, definitely.
But they not only do they have the capital to make the investment into that long run cheaper operation, but they also benefited from previously having the lower costs of really cheap employees, and now that they're paying more, they're basically making it so that none of their competitors can benefit from paying cheaply. They're trying to remove their ability to do that. Which that's a whole different conversation about why people should be very against minimum wage laws, because they're basically designed by large companies to keep other companies from growing to be their size. They're basically designed. Because with enough scale, that cost doesn't matter. With a large enough scale, it's just you're getting so much more efficient that it just doesn't even matter what the employee costs are, essentially, or effectively. So it's crazy.
Yeah.
Like it's really crazy, and plus each additional employee at Amazon is going to be one out of tens, hundreds of thousands of employees. Each new employee at a mom and pop shop, that might be 50% of your workforce. If you're one person, you hire a second person.
Yeah. I've seen a lot of people going out of business here, and there's a lot more big conglomerates here now.
Yeah, and I think this is why everyone needs to take economics courses, because I've talked to so many people who are just like, well, if a company can't afford to pay someone a living wage, then they shouldn't be in business. Just like they're struggling to pay themselves a living wage. Like, plus, like, what is a living wage, and why should, if you have a teenager who wants to get work experience, why should they be paid a wage that's enough for them to live on their own on, when like they only need like they just wanted $20?
Yeah, it's actually, isn't it just like they want a living wage? Okay, well, find a job that pays a living wage. And there's the Dirty Jobs guy from Discovery Channel, and he spoke to some people that basically decided like, hey, instead of going to a job I like and demanding a wage, I'm going to a job I don't like. I'm going to get so good at it, they should pay me whatever. And so there was one guy who became a millionaire by cleaning septic tanks. He became the best of the best in the worst job you could think of, cleaning shit out of a tank. And
yeah,
he became a millionaire off of that. And so in that sense, it's like the market works fine there. You shouldn't enforce that minimum wage. But even more so, if the mom and pop shop isn't forced to pay $15 an hour, it's probably going to be a cheap place to shop. So I buy since Corona started, I started going more to the weekly market more, and I noticed that many of the vegetables I buy there are cheaper. Why? Well, one of the reasons is the guy that runs the shop just takes his son and daughter there, and he's like, "You guys are not officially employed here. I don't have to pay you anything. We just, take care of this at home because you're my son and daughter.
Yeah.
You're just here to help out. That's how it works." And so he can make that real cheap. And obviously he also buys in smart, so sometimes I go there and he doesn't have peppers. I'm like, drat. But I don't care, because it's cheap and it's fun, and I got like a whole bag of bell peppers for €2. I'm like, I would pay €5 for this in the store.
There's a lot of good things that can come from it. There's also like the potential of people who just like, they don't necessarily need a living wage. They just want either supplemental income, or maybe they just want to be able to do something. Like maybe they just have a lot of free time. They're just like, I want to feel like I'm doing something to support my community, or help a friend, or just keep myself busy in a way. And the income is just kind of the bonus on top of that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. There's a lot of laws that prevent that. I've got a young friend. He recently turned 13. In the Netherlands, you can't work at the age of 12. He was like, I want to do something. Let me pick apples. And they're like, yeah, we can't employ you until 14 because the law, blah, 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 blah. And then I had to hear that story from him, and we're friends because we play Minecraft together. It's real fun, but he's also a real deep thinking guy.
Yeah.
He's like, well, that's unfair. I'm like, yeah, that is unfair. You know
like,
why that law exists.
I get why people want to make child labor laws, because they don't want children to be abused, or like they don't want children in like parents from some like bad homes to be abusing their kids and making their kids support their entire family. Like they don't want to do that, and I guess I get that they want to disincentivize that, but at the same time, it's also preventing more like upstart people from being able to go and get a job. I remember I wanted to get a job when I was 12 too, and I went to store. It's like, oh, you can't get a job till you're 14. It's like, okay, fine, whatever. Went there again next year when I was 13, and just like, yeah, it's still 14. Went there when I was 14. Oh, it's 16 now.
Oh, yes. Oh, they should at least decide on something, keep it that way. To close this off a little bit, maybe you want to close this out completely, but to get a complete ridiculous thing is, when I turned 16, I was allowed to drink. The Netherlands, generally beer, anything below 16% legal at 16. It used to be. The year I turned 18, the year I turned 19 and some of my friends turned 18, they changed that to 18. They didn't change hard liquor. Hard liquor is still 18 in the Netherlands. But they did change the beer limit from 16 to 18. So I just skipped the boundary. But some people that were like 17 and a half were like, yesterday I was allowed to drink. Now I'm not. It's like the same thing. It's like, stop messing with the age thing. Just pick a number and keep it there forever. Because this is just unnecessarily.
Well, I think we did definitely skew off of the topic, but it was definitely a great conversation. I love talking to you, man. It's been great. Anyhow, I hope you all have enjoyed this special interview episode of Ember, and we definitely look forward to having more like this in the future. All right. But before we go, tell people where they can find you.
I've got a very small social media presence, but you can find me at technotive.locals.com.
It will be in the description.
I suppose it's going to be linked somewhere. Yes, and for those people, I only work 4 days a week, and so for people who have security questions or security problems, or want to know a little bit more about how do I secure a company, or you're a startup, you want to secure your own company, you can find me at technotive.nl /en. So that's for the English website. I'll try to link that one at least below my video. and probably you can find me if you Google. If you land on the Dutch site, just email me.
Well, all right then.
My email's
Sounds
on the Dutch site as
good.
well.
And once again, I am James Darian, co-founder of Ember and Commutation Construct. You guys should hopefully know the links by now, but they'll still be in the description below. Be sure to give us a follow, subscribe, and like if you liked it, and we will talk to you guys soon. See ya.
Bye!